Well, here we are, tasting wine with Pete and Dave.
G'day mate, how are you? What do we got today?
Very good. Pete, before we start, you went to wine tasting yesterday.
Oh,
Was
I
it
did.
a regional?
Yeah, Canberra Regional Wine Show. And yeah, very interesting. The local wine show, a lot of interesting different wines on tasting there. And yeah, interesting again, a Riesling won it this year. A Ravensworth Riesling was the top wine in the local show, which is interesting. We do good Riesling here, but yeah, in most years it's the Shiraz that normally comes up trumps, so that surprised a few people. But,
Great.
Yeah, we'll have a look at some more of those wines maybe in the next couple of weeks.
All right, well, we're going to start out with a Riesling as well. We've got a Segersdorf. Now, this is a Hardy's wine.
Yep.
2013 Riesling from Clare Valley.
Okay. Well, the wines we looked at yesterday at the Canberra show were 2013 as well, so they're all coming on stream now. Pretty interesting to think of them being quite so young. The fact that obviously the grapes were still hanging on the vines only about 6 months ago.
Yeah. Well, I get some nice fruit there.
Yep.
Kind of get a little bit of an appley kind of a sensation on that wine.
Well, it's a little bit restrained, but not as restrained as perhaps you might expect, given that it's 2013. I mean, you'd normally think it'd be really, really tight and zingy and not showing a lot, but there's even a little bit more colour there than you would normally get in a 2013 vintage Riesling.
I'll get the apples on the palate as well, and that reminds me, like I say, I think for me, it's all about wine reminding me of things through my life and experiences I've had, and to me that reminds me of a smashed apple. You know, if you've ever dropped an apple, maybe even a delicious to be kind of specific, and
well, not a Granny Smith because they're green. So
yes.
You're not getting green apple in this.
No. But it's very pleasant, and I can think of a lot of different types of food that would really go well with.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Oh, look, as a generic thing, any sort of seafoody, any salady sort of things that'd go well with. But interesting wine. It's commercial style, and Segersdorf is usually one of the more reliable, affordable Rieslings on the market, and it shows a lot of upfront character as a young wine, and this one certainly does that. So, yeah.
Well, another young wine. We've got a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh, just for something different.
Yes.
We've got a Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough.
We got to have one of those a week, don't we?
I think so. It's almost obligatory, isn't it? Really. Yeah. In
This
terms of what the buying public are looking for, nobody's. You hear the wine snobs, so to speak, of whom you've been accused of being one,
Yes.
but I know you're not. So. But I mean, the wine snobs always say, look, it's running out of steam. People, someone sometime soon is going to stop buying Sauvignon Blanc, but you know what? None of those people walk into a bottle shop.
They make more of it in New Zealand than
and it keeps
they
on
go
selling.
crazy about it.
And the wine style is showing no sign whatsoever of becoming diminished in popularity. It keeps on keeping on.
And these guys are big. This is a Gießen Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc 2012.
Yep.
And they make a lot of wine.
They do. They're big in terms of
Blanc.
they're big in terms of production. They're also big in terms of consistent quality, reliability. For the amount of wine they make, they do a great job with this. It's always one of the market leaders, and it's invariably consistent. I don't honestly think I can remember a time in the last half a dozen years or so where I've had a new release Gießen Sauvignon Blanc and somebody said, oh look, that there's something missing there. It doesn't happen. They consistently, they nail it, and they do a good job of it.
Yeah, it's on the palate. It's got all that citrusy fruit. There's that passion, big passion fruit sort of character in there, and there's a little bit of that grassiness.
A little bit of grassiness, but it's not overt. It doesn't get in the way.
No.
And if you start to think you've got too much grassiness, then you're starting to think, all right, a bit underripe, not quite so pleasant. But this is edging in that direction, but it still has plenty of tropical fruit, plenty of that sort of character on the nose and on the palate.
Yep, and lovely Sauvignon Blanc. Be great with fish, as we said in the past.
Yep, shellfish, oysters, mussels.
Yep. Salad with oil and vinegar. It'll cut through that.
Well, those classic, the New Zealand green lip mussels. I mean, a plate of those, you don't need anything more than a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc to go down, so that works.
Bluff oysters.
Yep.
All right, the next one we've got here, Pete, this is a Robert Oatley Chardonnay.
Oh, okay.
This should be interesting.
This is a new range.
This is Margaret River, 2012.
Okay, so this is relatively new onto the market, this range of wines. Robert Oatley, of course, the guy who started up Rosemount and made his fortune out of coffee in New Guinea, made enough money to feed several small cities in the third world. But he's back into it now, making wine under this label. But he's got a bit of a star, Larry Cherubino, a guy who is synonymous these days with great winemaking in WA. And he's the guy who's been charged with responsibility of putting all these wines together. So you really should be getting pretty reasonable wine out of this, albeit Margaret River Chardonnay from a young vintage. But
some lovely stone fruit there. Probably not as big as the Stonias that we tried last week, but some lovely stone fruit, and I get the almost creaminess on the nose as well. And I get the oak sensation on the nose.
I mean, it's perfectly palatable, approachable Chardonnay. It does all the things that you want it to do. It's, as you said, it's probably not as complex as some others. Certainly not as complex, I don't think, as the Chardonnay, as the Estonia that we had last week. But, you know, I mean, that's just one of those things. That was a Mornington Chardonnay. Those guys have been making that wine from their little patch of ground for a long time. But,
gives a lovely mouthfeel, and it feels very complete. Everything is there. It's just, it's a lovely wine. And,
very drinkable, very approachable. All the right sort of character, and Chardonnay lovers would have no problem with that.
Now, next on our list, we're into the reds here. We've got Jacob's Creek. Now, they're no small operation either.
No. This is the reserve.
This is the reserve Shiraz from Barossa, 2011. 2011 was not that crash out in Barossa because I've been told, a lot of people left fruit on the vine. They just didn't pick it in time, and of course with all that rain, the grapes burst.
This is true. The rain came at the wrong time for a lot of guys, and I mean it was cool and damp a lot of the time. You don't have any problem with it being cool. In a warm region like the Barossa, you're quite happy if you get a cool ripening season, a long cool ripening season, but you don't want rain to go with it. So
first thing I get on the nose there, Pete, that is a very dark wine, but the first thing I get on the nose is all that big berry fruit. But underlying there, I just get a sensation of just a little bit of greenness, even on the nose.
I get quite a bit of oak as well. There's a vanilla. You hear people talk about vanilla oak, whether it's American or French, whether it's new oak, but a character probably more readily associated with American oak, in the sense that it's a more obvious oak character. But you'll often hear people talk about vanilla or vanilla bean elements, and you can smell the vanilla oak. Well, this is a wine where you get that. There's no shortage of it, and if somebody wants to perhaps have a look and see, okay, where do we get, I've heard all these wine people talk about vanilla oak or vanilla on the nose, go and buy a bottle of this and you'll get a handle on where that comes from. So.
Absolutely, it's beautiful, and I love the big fruitiness of that wine, and like you say, that oak that's there, that's an interesting characteristic.
It can cover a multitude of sins too, good oak. And there's a nice fruit weight on the palate, but maybe just not quite the length and the depth or the intensity that you might have expected in a better vintage, but still a pretty good drink.
All right, next we've got is Red Knot.
All right.
Ever since this stuff came out,
it seems to come out with medals on it.
It comes out with medals on it, or not too long after it comes out, it's got medals on it. Now, this is a 2012 McLaren Vale straight Shiraz.
Okay. Well, that's where they come from. It's actually made by Shingleback, which so a lot of people don't really, I guess, know that, because Red Knot as a label has got such a market presence that it's as if people think, oh, well, this must be the Red Knot winery. There's so much of it around, not just the Shiraz, but there's Cabernet and there's a GSM blend actually, which is quite often the best of the lot.
Well, the first thing I noticed on the nose here, there's much bigger fruit than the 2011 from Barossa.
Well, it's much brighter fruit, and there's not as much oak in the way of it, which is, I guess, the go if you want to release a wine, a Shiraz from McLaren Vale, so young. You don't want to have any oak in the way of it, because you want it to be a drink now style, and people are not going to want to get oak getting in the road of that bright fruit, and there's loads of bright fruit in that.
Not too much tannin in there, but there's just a little bit of tannin there as well. It's very nice.
It's just there for structure. It's there to give it structure and to make it a bit more of a red wine drinker's red, if you like, but the essence of the wine is big bright fruit.
It's a style I like. I could drink that watching the football game this weekend.
Absolutely, you could, You'd probably want to have it sitting near a little fire to keep it warm, but no, that's a good drink, and it's pretty typical of what these guys do with that range of wines.
Absolutely. Now, I'm looking forward to this St. Hallett. I don't know that much about St. Hallett, Pete. Now, But the wines that I've had from St. Helens have always been very, very nice. This is a Barossa. It's called Western Front Shiraz. Now, this is 2010.
Okay.
So this is going to be
so straight away we've got
nice.
the alarm bells going off. 2010, ding ding,
Yep.
good vintage, great vintage.
Big fruit. Yep.
These guys, St. Helens is one of the iconic names of the Barossa Valley. Shiraz is what they do. I mean, they do other stuff as well, but they're known for the calibre of their Shiraz at all price points. But they're very consistent, and they, you go a long way to find a bad St. Helens wine. I can't remember having one, so. That's got beautiful savoury character on the nose, a bit more complex than either of the other two, obviously.
Beautiful savoury on the palate as well.
Big sweet fruit, but beautifully balanced. Not over the top, not jammy at all. Well handled oak. There wouldn't be a lot of new oak in this, and you don't need it. But at the same time, the structure and the balance of that wine, you could keep that for another 10 years if you wanted to.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Probably not in my house, so I don't think they'd last that long.
Wouldn't last that long in my house either, Pete. I do love a Shiraz. And there's a bit of football to watch this weekend as well. So, okay, next one we've got here. Now this is interesting. This is a Coonawarra Shiraz. This is Redmond 2010. This is going to be very ripe as well, I suspect.
Yeah, very ripe, but again, well balanced rather than overripe. Again, 2010. These guys, another iconic name, even more iconic really in terms of the Australian wine industry and the history of Australian wine. Redmond, one of the great names of Coonawarra.
Yeah, now the first thing I get on the nose, it doesn't seem to be quite the big berry fruit there.
No. A bit more Australian, a bit more subtle, but still plenty of fruit, just in a more medium-bodied spectrum, if you like.
Oh, that's very nice. Wow, and very well balanced. I get some interesting things happening in the middle of the palate, as well as the back end there.
You've got a lot of, I guess, soft berry fruit to start off with, but on the palate you're getting a little bit of that grippy tannin. That is again a Coonawarra trademark, and a classic Redmond style. A bit of an older-fashioned style of red, if you like. No newfangled winemaking tricks going on, but just a typical oldie-worldy Coonawarra Shiraz, and a beautiful wine, good drink, and that'll keep as long as you want to keep it as well. That's maybe if you want to keep it 30 years, you may not, but yeah, over the next 10 years or so, that'll sell her into something really good, really interesting. So yeah, a good wine. I mean, the 2010 Cabernet from Redmond was the top Cabernet at the National Wine Show last year, so obviously they had a pretty good year in 2010.
Yeah. Lovely. I think I want my cellar fairly well depleted in 30 years. Pete.
I would probably think so as well. But,
I'm probably not going to be here that long, so,
so you don't want
somebody else will be enjoying my cellar.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Now we've got a Stonyfeld. This is the Cellars Shiraz Cabernet from 2011 from Langhorne Creek.
All right. Okay. Another famous name. So we're hitting the jackpot with famous Australian wine names. Stonyfeld, often known as the Stonyfeld Matala in days gone by, and in fact the Stonyfeld Matala won the first Jimmy Watson Trophy back in the early 1960s. The first Jimmy Watson Trophy awarded at the Melbourne Wine Show was won by a Stonyfeld Matala wine back in, I think, 61 or 62.
That Matala is their top label, is it?
Yeah. Yep. Well, there's a medium range, a white label that sells for like between $15 and $20, I think, but they've got upmarket Shiraz that's got a black label on it that sells for a lot more than that.
Yep, lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a lovely wine. Very, very nice palate, very nice nose.
Yeah.
Probably not as big a fruit as I was getting with the Shirazes, but there's plenty of fruit there. And I get those dark berry fruit flavors on the palate, as well as traditionally the Cabernet, the black currant.
It's not as big a wine, if you like, as obviously the St. Helens from the Barossa, and it's probably not as intense or as structured as the Redmond from Coonawarra. However, you are getting, I guess, a traditional Aussie red blend, Shiraz Cabernet, something that they don't do in other parts of the world. We do it here because we can. So we have license to do whatever we like in our wineries. If we've got some Shiraz and we've got some Cabernet, we want to blend them together, then we're quite at liberty to do that. And
they would have never done that in France.
No, they're not allowed to. Well, maybe on the southern part, down in Languedoc, they can do what they like, but in the classic wine regions of France, no, you don't get that happening. But You get that on the nose, that chocolatey Shiraz sort of fruit, a bit of mintiness from the Langhorne Creek fruit, but then you get the structure of the Cabernet on the palate, the tannin that flows nicely through the palate. And I dare say, from 2011, we keep talking about that vintage, but this one perhaps transcends.
They snuck through
the vintage a bit. They did a pretty good job with this. So.
Well done. Okay, well that's it for this week, Pete. So we'll see you again next week.
Too easy. Good thing.